In the early 2000s, Quiznos was an absolute monster in the fast food world. It had nearly 5,000 locations and was on track to dethrone the king, Subway. Their secret weapon? A simple but game-changing idea: toasting the subs. But just a decade later, Quiznos was a ghost. Between 2007 and 2017, the chain completely collapsed, losing over 90% of its stores in one of the fastest and most spectacular implosions in restaurant history. But here's the twist. Quiznos didn't fail because people stopped loving its sandwiches. It failed because the company declared a brutal internal war on its own store owners. This is the story of how corporate greed turned a beloved brand into a cautionary tale. The golden age of Toasty. It all kicked off in 1981, when chef Jimmy Lambatos opened the first Quiznos in Denver, Colorado. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity. Take a normal sub and run it through a conveyor toaster. The result? A hot, melty, and flavorful sandwich that just felt more premium than anything else out there. For about a decade, it was a local favorite. But in 1991, everything changed when a father-son duo, Rick and Richard Shaden, bought the company and decided to franchise the heck out of it. And franchise they did. The growth was explosive. By the late 90s and early 2000s, Quiznos was suddenly everywhere. It became the second largest sandwich chain in North America, right behind Subway. At its peak in 2007, there were 4,700 locations in the US alone. The branding was just as aggressive and bizarre as its growth. Quiznos styled itself as the quirky, edgy alternative to Subway's clean-cut image. This led to one of the weirdest ad campaigns of all time. The Spung Monkeys. These things, these strange, rodent-like creatures with bulging eyes, sang off-key about their love for Quiznos subs and became a viral sensation before going viral was really a thing. Love them or hate them, you couldn't ignore them. Quiznos had insane brand recognition. They had a unique product, a massive footprint, and ads that everybody was talking about. From the outside, it looked like they were on top of the world. But behind the scenes, the seeds of their own destruction were already sprouting. The seeds of downfall. The entire business model that fueled Quiznos' meteoric rise was basically a house of cards, built on exploiting its own franchisees. To put it simply, Quiznos wasn't really in the business of selling sandwiches to people. It was in the business of selling supplies, food, and paper goods to its own store owners at massively inflated prices. Here's how it worked. When the Shadens bought the company, they also created a food distribution company. It eventually became a subsidiary called American Food Distributors, and franchisees were contractually forced to buy all of their ingredients, from meat and cheese to the signature bread and even napkins, directly from this company. And corporate could charge whatever price it wanted. It was a captive market. The numbers are just staggering. Meanwhile, the average Quiznos location was only bringing in about $400,000 in annual sales. With sky-high food costs mandated by corporate, many franchisees found it nearly impossible to turn a profit, even with a line out the door. One franchisee even reported it was cheaper to just go to a local grocery store and buy ingredients than to purchase them from their own parent company. This predatory model got supercharged in 2006. A private equity firm bought a stake in Quiznos in a leveraged buyout, saddling the company with hundreds of millions of dollars in debt. A leveraged buyout is incredibly risky. It assumes a company will keep growing at a wild pace because the profits are used to pay off the debt from the purchase itself. Now, Quiznos corporate was under even more pressure to squeeze every last cent out of its franchisees to pay off this massive debt. In one lawsuit, a damning piece of evidence surfaced. A 2003 company memorandum allegedly stated that 40% of Quiznos stores weren't even breaking even, a terrifying statistic that was not disclosed to new buyers. The fuse was officially lit. The crisis. Just as all this internal pressure was reaching a boiling point, the competition delivered a 1-2 punch. For years, Quiznos' key advantage was the toaster. But in 2005, Subway, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, decided to erase that advantage. They rolled out small, efficient toasters to their thousands of locations, and suddenly, Quiznos' unique selling proposition vanished overnight. Then, Subway launched one of the most successful promotions in fast food history, the $5 footlong. It was a genius marketing move that resonated with a public about to be hammered by the 2008 Great Recession. Quiznos, drowning in debt and running a system that required high prices to work, made a fatal mistake. They tried to compete on price. Corporate started pushing discounts and coupons. But since the franchisees were already paying insane prices for their supplies, these discounts came directly out of their razor-thin or even non-existent profit margins. The breaking point came in 2009. Corporate sent out a coupon for a free sandwich, a move that would have been financially disastrous for store owners. In an unprecedented act of rebellion, franchisees across the country organized and simply refused to honor the coupons. Customers showed up, coupon in hand, only to be turned away. It was a public relations nightmare that caused confusion and anger, further dragging the brand's name through the mud. Franchisees were furious, and they started to fight back. Lawsuits began piling up around 2006, alleging fraud, misrepresentation, and even racketeering, arguing that Quiznos' business model was an illegal scheme. The lawsuits painted a picture of a system where the franchisor got rich, while the franchisees went broke. Tragically, the pressure became too much for some. In one highly publicized case, a franchisee took his own life after his store failed, leaving behind a note calling for an investigation into the company's business practices. The war between Quiznos and its own people was now out in the open, and it was getting ugly. The collapse. The tidal wave of lawsuits ultimately drowned the company. These weren't just a few angry operators. These were massive class action lawsuits representing thousands of franchisees. By 2009, several of these were consolidated, with store owners arguing that the entire supply chain was a fraudulent system designed to bankrupt them. The settlements were astronomical. In 2009, Quiznos settled one case for $95 million. A year later, another set of consolidated lawsuits resulted in a settlement valued at a stunning $206 million. The courts had essentially confirmed what franchisees had been screaming for years. The system was broken and predatory. The company's own legal disclosure documents eventually grew to include 10 full pages just listing its litigation history. At the same time, the 2008 financial crisis was tearing through the economy. Customers had less money to spend, and Subway's $5 footlong was a much better deal than a premium-priced Quiznos sub. With no profits and mounting personal debt, franchisees began closing their doors in droves. It was a fire sale. 700 locations closed in 2009 alone, and another 800 vanished in 2010. Used Quiznos equipment flooded sites like Craigslist for pennies on the dollar. Corporate, buried under its own massive debt from the buyout, couldn't stop the bleeding. The money from the inflated food costs was too critical for paying its own bills, so it couldn't afford to give store owners any relief. Finally, the inevitable happened. On March 14, 2014, Quiznos filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, citing nearly $900 million in debt and seeking to restructure. The empire had crumbled, hollowed out from the inside. The aftermath and lessons learned. Today, Quiznos is just a shadow of its former self. From a peak of 4,700 U.S. locations in 2007, the number had plummeted to fewer than 400 a decade later. As of early 2026, that number has dwindled to just 148 locations in the entire United States. It is, without a doubt, one of the greatest collapses in the history of the restaurant industry. The company that bought Quiznos in 2018, High Bluff Capital Partners, is trying to stage a comeback. They've even brought back the Spung Monkeys in a nostalgic marketing ploy. In a statement on their website, the company itself admits, "We lost our way. We tried to do too much at once, and ended up with thousands of stores shutting down." So what's the ultimate lesson from the fall of Quiznos? It's a textbook case of a predatory franchise model gone wrong. A franchise system is supposed to be a partnership. The franchisor provides the brand and the system, and the franchisee provides the capital, the labor, and the local connection. For the whole thing to work, both partners have to win. Quiznos shattered that fundamental rule. It treated its franchisees not as partners, but as captive customers to be squeezed for every last dime. This obsession with short-term corporate profits at the expense of its store owners created a system that was fundamentally unstable. The moment it faced tough competition and an economic downturn, it had no resilience. There was no goodwill left with the very people who were supposed to be its biggest ambassadors. They had already been pushed to the brink, and the entire structure just caved in. The food was never the problem. The problem was greed. The story of Quiznos is a powerful warning about what can happen when a company turns on its own people. It proves that even a great product can be destroyed by a broken business model. But what do you think? Were you a fan of Quiznos back in its glory days? And do you think it could have survived if it had just treated its store owners like true partners? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And if you found this story interesting, be sure to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the rise and fall of famous businesses.